Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Another episode here. Her business, her voice, her conversation. I'm your host, Margot Levette. Well, when am I not in fangirl mode? Let me tell you, everybody knows that I love podcasting, communication, and really forming relationships with people, listening to what they have to say. And today, my guest is Traci DeForge, and I'm telling you, a podcaster's podcaster, a broadcaster's broadcaster. This woman brings 30 years worth of information to us today. So I'm going to tamp myself down and bring her on in so that we can get into some questions I know that you've asked me to ask on your behalf, and we will all come our way saying, wow, this was a good episode. So welcome, Traci. I am so glad that you are here with us today.
Well, thank you. I could not ask for a more wonderful introduction than that. And I'm a little bit of a fangirl here myself. So here we go.
Well, this is coming from an international podcast expert, and I want everybody to know that you are the founder of a full service podcast production company. Yes, she leaves us without excuse. And we're talking about produceyourpodcast.com. So now, Traci is the person that I wanted to speak with concerning women. And my first question, Traci, is now a good time for women to actually build and own their own podcast?
You know, I'm so excited that you asked me this question because now has never been a better time for women to build their podcast. And it's not just my opinion. I am a huge advocate for that your voice matters, and any voice can change the conversation in an industry or about a passion or about a topic, can even save a life or make an impact in ways that you never have an idea. So that is how I always feel about women's voices and using their voices to be heard. But in the most recent Edison research, and at the time we're recording this episode, it's March of 2023. So this research is hot off the press, as recent as a week or so ago, right? And it's the first time that women listenership has exceeded male listenership. It's been hovering at around 49% for several years back to back. But this is the first year that it's gone from over. So it's 51% women now. And that's tipping point. I think once we've crossed that, there's no looking back. So that's one reason. And then the second reason is that women are looking for more women focused content. So now that the numbers have increased, which is fantastic, women are looking for podcasts that will support the interests and the passions and the education, the inspiration and motivation that they're looking for. So they're looking for women hosted content. We've even made suggestions that if you're a male host of your podcast, think about bringing in a woman co-host, because you are absolutely needed. And if you're a woman who wants to start a podcast, you've been sitting on the sidelines, now is your time. So absolutely.
That is music to my ears, Traci. That is music to my ears, because we've been watching the stats for some time, and women have been easing up in numbers and easing up in numbers. And now we have surpassed. That is taking, I think that's really us owning our voices, owning our power collectively. What say you to that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And one of the other powerful statistics that's happening right now is that there's a very strong movement of women 55 plus who are getting into not only in the podcast listening space, but the podcast hosting space, having their own shows. And I really think, me being very close to that 55 number, I think it's just, we come into our own, we have more confidence to say what it is that we want to say. I have a friend who always says, say what you mean what you say it without being mean. And I think the older you get, the more we hope to think wise we get. And we feel like we can use our voice for good and do that confidently and not be intimidated to do it behind a microphone. So I think that demo around women 55 plus is very powerful.
That's, again, music to my ears. Traci, I was 61 years old when I decided that I was going to become a professional podcaster. I came out of corporate, had always been an employee. Podcasting was a hobby, but that something went off in my head and I became that podcaster and I never looked back. So I am so very happy to hear these stats. We bring a flavor and a spice to podcasting. And you're right, a certain amount of sage wisdom that is just missing. And what you bring to the table for across the board is just amazing. It really, really is. I understand that you are a editorial on the editorial board of Podcast Business Journal. So a mixture of men and women. I love reading that period. Oh my goodness, I subscribed when I found out that it was available to everyone. I love reading it.
Thank you.
Oh, you are so very welcome. And just tell everybody there, keep doing the work that you do, because we need a true inside look at what's going on in the industry. So I posed that I brought that out saying that men and women both together on the board there. So how are the men? Are they making room for women, since we are listeners, since we are entrepreneurs? I mean, we are mounting in every category. So are the fellas making room for us there in podcasting as far as your vantage point?
Well, again, I really appreciate that question. And I don't get asked that question probably nearly enough. And so Ed Ryan is the editor of the Podcast Business Journal. And I can't say enough wonderful things about him and the opportunities and that he embraces, not only for me personally, being on the editorial board. I mean, the ratio is as it is with most everything right now. It's a little higher skews on the male side than the female side, but he is incredibly supportive of women hosted podcasts, news stories, industry trends, anything that really embraces diversity and inclusion really for all podcasters. And I have always felt in every way of being involved with that organization, I've never felt that differentiation between male versus female. And that's a powerful statement coming from a broadcast radio background where I spent 20 plus years in an industry that was extremely heavily male dominated. I was very young for my age in the management positions that I held at the time. And some of the things that people felt comfortable saying to me in those 2 decades of my life, in my 20s and my 30s, I just honestly couldn't believe. I would get people, I would go to conferences and I would get comments like, oh, I've got ties older than you, or does your dad own the radio station, or even more inappropriate things than that I just don't even want to have a flashback on. But it was just a constant struggle of always feeling like I had to fit into my seat at the table in a way that brought value and was respected. I was young, I was blonde, I'm Southern. I've got all those attributes that just, enable people to underestimate you sometimes on the front end. And in some ways, quite honestly, I was like, bring on the underestimation. I love it when people underestimate me, because I will over deliver every time and you will be sorry you underestimated me. But that feels like that was a different chapter. I feel like the podcasting industry is so similar in a lot of ways to radio, but so incredibly different, which is one of the reasons why I love it so much, is because it is such an inclusive community and everyone wants to lift everyone else up. And I just recently returned from the Podcast Movement Evolutions conference that was held in Las Vegas. And everyone I talked to, whether they had launched their first episode or were a seasoned podcaster, everyone talked about how great the podcasting community is. And just an amazing, amazing experience. And then that enables me to then bring that level of enthusiasm to platforms like yours to encourage people to step into their space.
I love it. I love it. You are a pioneer on so many levels. And when I read the podcast Business Journal, I feel it is true journalism. He's really bringing the meat and the essence of what's going to help us podcasters. So once again, thank you for being there. And thank you, Ed Ryan, for what you bring to us and letting the women there have a seat at the table. My next question, Traci, is I understand that we're not only growing as women as far as podcasters, we are connecting our podcast to our business. And we look around, the financial climate is kind of, I don't know. And some people are really still on the edge, justifiably so. So I know that you are able to speak to how we recession-proof our podcast. So can you tie that together with, while we are taking a look at what's going on with our business, how do we secure our podcast so that if it's the business or it's the podcast, the podcast's got to go. How do I make sure that the listeners know that the podcast, if it's all possible, keep the two connected? Because in the long tail run of things, it's going to work out in your favor. Can you speak to that?
I would love to speak to that. It's actually probably one of my most favorite things to speak about, because I really encourage people to not see their business and their podcast as separate entities, but their podcast is a driving force and an extension of their business's brand, their marketing strategy, and a way for people to experience their brand in the most authentic way. And the idea that you would consider eliminating a podcasting experience and really depriving your audience of that experience really ultimately could mean that you would deprive them of the opportunity to ultimately do business with you. So I want you to really connect the dots on a podcast is probably one of the most cost-efficient ways for you to expand your marketing strategy and to keep it consistent. And what I mean by that is that, so for example, today, real life, you and I are recording this podcast. We're having an amazing conversation. So not only are we connecting to each other as individuals, as humans, as women, as business owners, but we also now have access to exchange collaborative opportunities, brainstorm about possible synergies that our businesses could have that door never would have opened if we hadn't been connecting just to record this podcast. So that community aspect, that networking aspect is the first step. Then the second step is the content we're recording. Again, we're creating content in the midst of a beautiful conversation. So not only is it something that's bringing pleasure and joy to me and ideally to you, but we're also having this conversation and creating amazing content. When we're done recording this episode, we'll go our separate ways, but this piece of content will live on. We can individually take this piece of content, we can transcribe it, we can take that transcription, we can turn it into blog posts, articles. You never know, it could show up in the podcast business journal. We can create social media posts, audiograms, video promotional pieces. And so from this one piece of content, we've connected, we've built a relationship, we've developed content that we can then repurpose into multiple areas. And this is an investment of a short window of our time that gives us a really long tail and multiple pieces of a really solid marketing strategy.
I couldn't say it even. I so agree with that. To me, that is keep the podcast connected to your business is recession-proofing your
Absolutely.
I think you answered the question for me.
Yeah. So keeping your podcast is connecting your business to your podcast is recession-proofing your business. I love that. I'm going to have to say that a little bit more clearly next time, but I think that's such a good point.
Wow.
Thank you.
I mean, there were three different entities coming out of this one conversation. And you're right, it will be evergreen. People will have a chance to have access to this conversation next year, 2 years from now, as we sleep. So we don't know the life that this is going to take. So thank you, thank you. I've been trying to tell people, don't separate the two. You're going to be sorry. My next question, it gets back to what you do, to your full service podcast production company. I've been telling people it's good to guest on other people's podcasts. That's powerful in its own right. But I choose to believe you should have your own podcast. You, Traci, you are a co-host on a couple of podcasts, but you also have and host your own podcast. So I believe in owned media. And when you own your own you have your own podcast, that is owned media. What say you to the people who want to form their own podcast? But as you know, everybody and their brother knows how to form a podcast. They took one class, paid maybe $200 or $300, and the next thing you know, they're out telling people how to build a podcast. I myself don't believe in that. I believe in people who have history, who have print and digital expertise. They can be found. So I want to send people your way. I really, really do, because since we are on the uptick of this amazing time in podcasting, why not get these podcast foundations built with a solid foundation? And you, dear lady, what you do is you're able to get people in that right position. So what is it like working with you? How do they reach you? What will it be like to set up a podcast with your company? And then, most of the time people don't get past podcast episode number 10. How do you get people over that? Oh my goodness, that pod fade thing, so that they know certain and true success? That's a long question, but
That's okay, girl, because I was following every word of it. And I appreciate everything that you said, because everybody's very excited about podcasting. And there are some podcast coaches and consultants that they started their own podcast and then they started their own podcast consulting business. That is my story. It was just 8 years ago. It was 8 years ago with 25 plus years of broadcast radio and business development expertise under my belt as well. So when you're looking for, I think I want to speak to your question in two parts. If you're looking for a podcast expert, a consultant, or a coach, there are a couple things you want to look for. Go to their LinkedIn profile and see what their background is. Do they have a background in business development? Do they have a background in marketing? Do they have a background in broadcasting? What are they bringing to the table other than the fact they may have launched a show? And then secondly, visit their website and look at their portfolio. How many shows have they actually launched successfully and that have stayed successful and are still releasing and are still moving forward with their podcast? And then really take a listen to some of those shows and watch some of those shows. And did they connect with you the way you would want your show represented? So those are three really solid tips for how to evaluate what agency or what coach or consultant to work with. With us, we focus on business people who want to grow their businesses with their podcast. That's our niche. That's our specialty. We don't do narrative storytelling podcasts, true crime, or lifestyle entertainment comedy podcasts. We don't do any of those because our niche is specializing in business growth focused podcasts. So if that sounds like you, one of the things that I can say, I think the biggest advantages of working with a company like ours is that we build the structure of this show with you, alongside you, but we're building it with growth in mind. Not only just the growth of downloads and audience, but we're also building this show for you to be a lead generation tool, to be something that we want to make sure your call to action is going to bring business to your website, that's going to convert into sales and leads, and that you're going to be able to increase your bottom line as a result of your podcast. We're going to ensure that you are positioned with a show that's not an infomercial, but is something that's edutainment, that's going to educate your audience, that's going to entertain your audience, while positioning you as a thought leader in your space and a subject matter expert. And then we're going to look at all of the marketing and all of the support that needs to happen on the back end. Because when you were talking about pod fade, you're excited, it's fun, you're getting your cover art done, you're getting your voiceovers and your music beds and all the things that make your show fantastic. And then the reality kicks in. People have to find your show. So our level of expertise, business development strategists, engineers, client managers, we're really big on the customer service side of things. That's probably one of our biggest differentiators, is that we're lifting you up not only through your launch, but you have a dedicated client manager that's going to work with you every single step of the way after your podcast launches. And we're going to constantly and consistently hone your marketing strategy alongside you so that people can discover your show and do business with you. And that's our biggest passion, is we want to create podcasts that make people want to do business with you.
I love that. Create a podcast that is going to make people want to do business with you. That's why I'm so glad that I have this conversation with you. Everybody is not able to position people the way you are. All those different moving pieces that you all implement and put into the foundation of a person's podcast, a lot of people are not able to come up with those deliverables. And I tell you, folks, Traci is your woman. You want to deal with produceyourpodcast.com. I kid you not. Traci, anybody who knows me, they know that I just get totally agitated about the charlatans, the straight out shysters, or the ones who just don't know that they don't know, but they're professing to know. So whenever I can put a person in the right direction, I am overjoyed. I really, really am, because this podcasting, it is long tail. And if we're going to go ahead and invest in ourselves and the time and the money and the energy, everything that goes into podcasting, if we're going to be there in the present and present ourselves in this arena, we may as well have the best foundation that we can. Don't you agree?
I do. And we constantly get the positive reinforcement. Once someone goes through the discovery strategy sessions with us, they're always a bit apprehensive at first. Do I really need this? There's a checklist online. My nephew can do this. But once we go through these strategy sessions with the host and really talk through what this podcast means in terms of being an extension of their brand, being the voice of their brand, and how to format the show in a way that's structured, but to the listener doesn't feel structured, and having what we call a warm call to action, a warm invite call to action, where people actually are feeling like you're talking to them. You're not just a person in a big room or a big area, but like one-on-one with that person. So they're just nuances that you want to integrate into your show that make a difference. And the one thing I also want to share that I think is really important, because it's so buzzy and it's so trendy right now, is all about artificial intelligence and Chat GPT. And here's the one thing, as a business owner and a content creator and hopefully a podcast host, that you need to know. There is nothing on this planet that can replicate the authenticity of you and your voice. So people can write expert blogs through Chat GPT. They can create courses. They can create step-by-step how-tos. But when you show up, like we're showing up today, and we are sharing our thought leadership, we're sharing our passions, we're sharing our soapboxes and our rants and our expertise, it's so genuine, it's so authentic. And it's truly an extension of who I am. It's truly an extension of who you are. And no Chat GPT can replicate the authenticity of your voice in a podcast. Just hands down, can't do it.
As they say, how many snaps do I give that? Because that is so true. It's all the rage, and I'm glad about artificial intelligence, but you're right. There's nothing like the human voice. There's nothing like eye contact. People are going to say, Margot rarely looks into the camera, but there's nothing like being in the moment, in that conversation. It's just you and that person, or you and that panel, and you all are exchanging energy, information that is valuable. Right. You know how many people don't have these opportunities? I mean, so I have to remind myself, Traci, often this is a blessing to be able to, that a person would carve out time and that you're both able to sit down and really hear each other. We are so rush until, and AI is a form of rush. But when we sit down and maybe we have a cup of tea while we're on camera or whatever, but whichever way we bring our podcast to our audiences, they get to know us. And that is an awesome gift. And then they give us the gift of getting into their ears before their eyes. And what a beautiful, beautiful exchange podcasting brings to all of us. That's why I love it so. I really do.
That's why I love you so. You're amazing.
You just don't know. I'm a crybaby. I will cry because I have been fangirling you for a while. And I'm looking at the time you have poured out into this conversation. For the novice, you've given them direction. For the person that's been around for a while, again, you've given direction. And people who know a lot, you're a person who gives, and we don't find that often, not enough. So I want to thank you for the information, for your transparency, for even showing up. Some people will even stiff and stand up a podcast host. I'm sure this happened to you.
It's happened to me. So I absolutely do not want to ever do that to anyone else unless it cannot be helped for whatever reason. But that is not today.
No, not intentionally. I never want to do that. So, ladies and gentlemen, one main takeaway, the two main takeaways that I want you to really pay attention to is that now, ladies, is a good time for you to get into podcasting. The numbers are up. Everything is moving in our favor. You heard it from the expert, Traci herself. My goodness, get in here now. And I want you to make sure that you have a firm foundation. Excuse me. So I want you to be sure to seek Traci's assistance, her help. I think you have a free consultation or something like that,
Absolutely.
15 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It won't take long for this lady to help you out and say and chart out where you are. Maybe you're a good fit. Maybe you aren't. Maybe now is your time. Maybe it's not. But I think that you owe it to yourself to go with the best that you can go with. So at least check Traci out. Traci, where do we find you?
Thank you so much for asking. So there are a couple of things. One, I want to provide you a resource that you could absolutely just take advantage of today. It's no charge for it whatsoever. You can go to produceyourpodcast.com and then /leverage. And that will give you access to an ebook that is all about how podcasting can help you grow your business as a marketing tool. So several of the points that we've talked about today, but even deeper dive. And so you can download that, no charge at all. And then, like you mentioned, which I super appreciate, you can schedule a consultation on the website. So really, you can find out anything that you need at produceyourpodcast.com and start there. And the other tip that I want to say to you is that no matter where you are in your process, in your journey, whether it's concept to launch to recording a few episodes and being really frustrated or being a seasoned podcaster, the most important thing I can say to you is start where you are, because where you are is okay. And it's exactly where you need to be. And wherever you are, you can go up from there. So just start where you are. Just start.
Just start. My goodness. We could go on and on and on. I have been enjoying this conversation with international podcast expert. She's the founder of produceyourpodcast.com. Very warm, giving woman who is a pioneer for all of us women in broadcast and the mixed media. Look for her on social media. She's fantastic over on LinkedIn. If you're not following her, do yourself a favor and go over there today. So I don't even know how to end this conversation. Traci, you want one last comment, or shall I just say, see everybody next week? I don't even know. how to end this. I'm
Well,
tongue-tied.
I will end it with gratitude, which is my most favorite way to end any conversation. So thank you so much. It has been my absolute pleasure, and just really it's such a positive experience to be a guest on your show. And listeners, you better keep liking this show. You better keep following the show. You better keep sharing the show, because this show has it going on. And I'm a podcast expert. I know what I'm talking about.
Oh my goodness. I really have to go now because I have a tissue here. I'm a big crybaby. So you mean the world to me. And International Women's Month, I take the whole month versus a day to salute the women who inspire me. And I've been following you for a long time now, had never had a conversation with you, but when you said yes, you would come, I immediately put it out there that you are one of my favorites. And I mean that with all my heart. So
You gave me chills. Thank you.
that's how we end this episode, everybody. Thank you for taking time to listen. And I'm Margot Levette, her business, her voice, her conversation. We will be back next week with a brand new episode right here. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye now.